Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I am your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, I am pleased to welcome Lynn Breuer of Metropolitan Detroit Jewish Family Service as we continue this important topic with part 2 of putting your best brain forward. Lynn, welcome.
Hello, Henry. It's good to see you again. We had just finished talking in part 1 about all the lifestyle factors that are in our control, the small decisions we can make each day to help impact our cognition for the better. And now we're going to talk about one of the most critical factors, and that's, are we getting enough mental stimulation in our days and in our weeks? I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen because I have a picture of a nerve cell that I would love for everyone to see. So anytime information gets passed in our bodies, something as simple as, Lynn, scratch your cheek, to how we do everything each day gets communicated from one nerve cell to another in our bodies in lightning speed. And so what we see here on the left side is this is a nerve cell, this is a nerve cell, this is a nerve cell, and these nerve cells connect to each other. And the site of where two nerve cells connect is what's blown up and enlarged on the right side. That's often referred to as a neural connection. And we have neural connections all the way through our body. We have a vast network of nerve cells. And what happens is a message gets sent from what's called a sending nerve, the nerve on top, to a receiving nerve, the nerve on the bottom. And it goes from sending nerve to receiving nerve. Receiving nerve turns around, sends it to the next nerve, turns around, send it to the next nerve. And that's how information flows through our bodies. However, we know that when there's cognitive damage, sometimes there's a sending nerve and there's no connection. There's no receiving nerve right here able to pick it up. And when that happens, the signal is lost, as if we never sent it in the first place. Now, we are born with a tremendous amount of nerve cells in our brain, and each nerve cell can form connections with many other nerve cells. So literally, we end up with 1 billion neural connections in our brains. But because our brains really want to work as efficiently as possible, we undergo a process called cognitive pruning. And that's when our nerve cells and connections that just aren't being used anymore get pruned out. Think of it as use it or lose it. The analogy is very similar. Imagine if throughout our lifetimes, everything we had ever touched or accumulated or used throughout our lifetimes were in our homes right now. They would be so full of belongings that would really slow us down. It would be hard to even operate that way. So instead, we don't do that. Every year or so, we go through and we declutter. We declutter our closets and our drawers and our kitchens, and we give things away so that we don't have too much. So this same thing happens in our brains. So every so often, the nerve cells, the neural connections, the neural pathways that we aren't using get pruned away. Now, this next slide is showing 3 different groups of nerves in our brains. On the left, we really have pretty much a single nerve cell, and then we have growing nerve cell connecting to others, and then we have a robust neural pathway. When we're first learning something, I want to explain why mental stimulation, learning something new, a novel task, a challenge, is so important. When we first attempt to do something we haven't done before, we don't have a vast neural pathway or neural network. We don't know how to do it. Think about someone who might play a new instrument. Let's say I'm learning to play the piano. When I first sit down, I don't know the difference between the white keys and the black keys. I might not know how to read the sheet music. What are the circles? What are the lines? But as I study, as I take lessons, I begin to form neural connections to assist me in learning how to play the piano. And if I stick with it and I practice and I take lessons, a few years down the road, I will have a robust network of neural connections, neural pathways that simply allow me to play the piano effortlessly and with ease. Now, let's say decades have gone by, I got busy, I went to college, I raised a family, I worked, and I stopped playing the piano. I no longer have this robust network. It's been pruned away because I wasn't using it. Now, if I just sit down in front of the piano, I wouldn't be starting from zero. Chances are I could still read music, although it certainly wouldn't be effortlessly, and I might have to count a little bit. I might remember some basic chords, but I wouldn't be able to play as before. With practice, I could pick it up. So this is an example of cognitive pruning, how we lose what we're not using, but it also is an example how when our brains are challenged, we can use our built-in ability of neuroplasticity. That means the ability to create new neural connections, create vast neural pathways. Our brains can adapt and change. And some of us may have seen this happen for someone. You might have seen someone who had a stroke and they had damage. Maybe they had weakness on one side, or maybe their speech was impaired, but they were lucky, and with a lot of hard work and therapy, they were able to regain some function. They were able to create new neural pathways. We aren't often able to repair damage. Once there's damage and connections are lost, current thinking is that those pathways are lost, but we can begin to build smaller neural networks. And that's the key between getting enough mental stimulation. And so the important takeaway message from this segment is that our brains need to be challenged. There's a concept called a cognitive reserve. Think of a cognitive reserve almost as a bank account for our brain health, for our cognition. Anytime we engage in cognitively stimulating activities, so the best would be a form of cognitive training, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, or a very challenging task, learning to play a new musical instrument, learning a new foreign language. We're making a tremendously large deposit in our cognitive reserve, but we make smaller deposits anytime we listen to a lecture, engage in an intellectual discussion, travel, tour an art museum. We're showing our brains new information. Studies have shown that people who have a larger, a more robust cognitive reserve, they consciously make deposits in their cognitive reserve, they fare better even as they get older and begin to have some cognitive decline. And they fare better, and faring better means functioning at a higher level, even if they develop some sort of dementia. That we can take two people who have had testing done, cognitive testing, being given the same diagnosis of dementia, but they function very differently. One functions much higher. Oftentimes when you interview that person, you hear a lifetime of living, making deposits in cognitive reserve. The good thing to know is that studies have shown it's never too late to build our cognitive reserve. There's not a window that would have closed, that no matter how old we are, we can still make deposits this way. But it's important to understand that we tend to gravitate towards activities that we enjoy. If it's an activity that we enjoy, that we're good at, that we've done often, it becomes just that, an enjoyable activity, but we don't really get that deposit in our cognitive reserve. So for example, if I'm an avid crossword puzzle lover and I do them all the time, I'm getting entertainment and it's better than doing nothing, but I would get much more bang for the buck doing something I don't enjoy. If I don't understand Sudoku, that's what I need to do. Or if I don't like word searches, that's what I need to do. It's gravitating towards what's hard, because if it's hard, we don't have a well-worn, well-established neural pathway to do that. One very positive way to do that research has shown is to engage in cognitive training. So cognitive training is usually something that's been created based on a body of research, and it targets specific functions in our brain, tasks that we count on our brain to be able to do every day in a specific order. And it's not something static. It's not like I do the same thing every day over and over, but it gets harder from session to session, and activities get faster and faster. So my brain can't ever really adapt and master it. I need to keep working and keep building new neural connections. There has been a lot of research, including some studies by the National Institute of Health in the last decade, to take a look at, is this effective? And yes, it is, but it has to follow certain circumstances. One being, has to be done 60 minutes at a time. We could engage in cognitive training for hours at a time, but we're not likely to get more benefit than if we put in an hour. But if we only put in 30 minutes or 45 minutes, we really do not get the same benefit. 60 minutes is the magic formula. And we need to engage in cognitive training at least twice a week for a period of about 12 weeks in order to have that benefit be lasting. The best analogy that I can think of for this is to think of being on an antibiotic. I think we've all had the experience of getting diagnosed with something like strep throat, and the doctor prescribes an antibiotic at a certain strength, a certain amount of times a day for 10 days, right? Well, with strep throat, if I take that antibiotic faithfully, what happens around day 3 or 4? I start to feel better. Well, sometimes if we start to feel better, we stop taking the antibiotic. And then what happens a few days later? It comes back. We did it enough to start to notice a change, but not enough to sustain that change. So the same is true, of course, of physical therapy. If we have back pain, I might go to a physical therapist once or twice, and I can feel better when I leave. But if I'm not gonna have that back pain recur, it usually takes a couple times a month for a few months in order to get sustained change. The same is true with any type of cognitive training activity. The 6 areas you see on the screen are some of the cognitive training targets because they're just critical functions that we count on our brain being able to do each day. So let's talk a little bit about what they are. So reaction time is generally something very important to target because it refers to how does our brain react to an unexpected change in our environment. It's a completely automatic process that we don't ever think about. If you were driving somewhere today and a traffic light suddenly went from green to yellow, reaction time would refer to how quickly did your eye send a signal to your brain, to send a signal to your foot to come off the accelerator and step on the brake. That's reaction time. So without us isolating it and targeting it in a class, it never gets strengthened. But like we know most of our physiological processes, things slow down the older we get, and that's true with our reaction time. And keeping that fast is really integral to being able to remain driving, which is very important for many older adults. The next area it's very important to strengthen, and this is the ideal order, is our visual spatial skills. We all have changes to our visual spatial field the older we get. The 2 most common areas to notice changes is depth perception and peripheral vision. Depth perception we might notice if we've noticed a change in our parking ability. Sometimes people might park the car, get out and think, oh, did I really park like that? Many times we didn't pull up as close as we should have, sometimes by a foot, sometimes by 2 or 3 feet. And sometimes people have the opposite action. They might have the trouble of actually tapping the car in front of them or tapping the wall in the garage because they pulled up too far, not recognizing when they should stop. So change in depth perception is normal but needs to be fought back against. The other change that happens is change in our peripheral vision, how far we can see sideways when we're looking straight ahead. That peripheral vision shrinks the older we get, and it shrinks even further if someone develops a dementia. So it's very important to push back. That's one of the reasons when we get older, we get a little more bumped and bruised than we used to. Let's say I'm coming in from the garage, my arms are full of groceries, I'm looking straight ahead at my door, I'm looking at the lock. I might not clear the door jamb in my peripheral vision, so I bump into it and I get a bruise on my arm. Or if I'm walking across the living room looking ahead at someone seated, I might not clear the corner of the coffee table and I get a bruise on my leg. So these are some of the reasons for what we see every day, and they're actually signs of cognitive decline. So it's always important to target that next in a cognitive training class. Then our ability to tune out distraction and really focus our attention, focus, our ability to concentrate is very critical, because we cannot recall later, which is a key memory function, anything we really didn't focus and devote our attention to in the moment. As a matter of fact, oftentimes people wonder, well, why do I remember this, but I didn't remember that? Chances are, whatever we didn't remember, we were not focusing our attention on. Oftentimes we multitask, our attention is fractured. So I might say, yes, absolutely, I'll be there at 3, but then 3 comes and goes and I don't remember because I was answering an email or I was doing something else. So our ability to single focus really needs to be strengthened. Then, once those 3 cognitive domains have been challenged, it's time to move on to memory. Now, I think most of us, if we said, what types of memory are there, might say, oh, short-term and long-term, because that's what we hear so much about. And that's true. But from a cognitive training standpoint, there are 4 different types of memory that are really important to challenge. The first is auditory memory, and that really should be challenged just about every cognitive training session because it's what we use the most in our daily life. We rely on it to be strong. Auditory memory refers to how well do I remember what I only hear. So think of all the times someone's talking to you and you're walking and you just need to hold on to it in your memory, or you're listening to a voicemail message and you can't find a pen to write it down. So the information is coming into your brain from your ears, and that's your only way to hold on to it. So that's auditory memory. Next is visual memory. How well do we remember what we only see? So if you're looking at a map and then you need to go navigate, that would be an example of visual memory. Then there's kinesthetic memory, which is how well do we remember as our bodies move through space, learning by doing. An example of that might be if you went to visit a friend in the hospital and you stopped at the introduction desk and they gave you directions, which were very complicated. After your hour-long visit, when you leave your friend's room, can you navigate your way out based on where you have been as you move through space? And then finally, verbal memory, which is how well do we remember what we see in word form? So anything we read, from instructions on how to take medications to directions on how to get somewhere or complete a task on the computer. So these 4 different types of memory function independently, but they all work together. So imagine if you were going to the gym and you were going to use weights to strengthen upper body. You would isolate and strengthen your bicep and your tricep and your deltoids all separately. In life, you just move your arm, right? Just like in life, we use our memory as one unit, but the weaker parts limit the functioning of the whole. So only when we train these different memory components by themselves do we discover which parts are weak so we can target them to help them get stronger. The next cognitive task it's important to strengthen is language, which really is a 2-step process. It's expressive language, meaning can I access just the right words to tell someone what's going on, even if I'm agitated or excited? And then the opposite, can I understand and decode all the information coming at me when someone is speaking and going on and on? We want to keep our language issues to just a slight word finding occasional issue if we can. And then finally, the last cognitive task it's important to take on is problem solving. You know, problem solving really relies on all of our other cognitive skills. One of the things that I used to really puzzle about years ago is how does someone who's savvy and smart and intelligent and educated and sophisticated, who could spot a scam from miles away when they're younger, suddenly fall victim to them when they're older? Yet we hear about senior scams in the headline all the time. And really, I understand it now as a failure of our problem-solving skills, often a failure of memory. Let me give you an example. So Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation is an organization that my family supports each year. We have a personal connection. But if I'm 80 years old and I get a letter in the mail one day thanking me for my annual pledge, but very gently letting me know that they have not received my check, what am I going to do? Well, If my visual memory has declined, I won't notice that the logo seems off. It's a circle, and it's never been a circle before. And the ink looks different. It's purple. It's always been a different color. It's never been purple. And if my kinesthetic memory as I move through space, as my body moves, has declined, I won't go, wait a minute, of course they haven't received my check, because I don't make charitable contributions by check. I'm in front of the computer. I do my donating online. And if my verbal memory for words has declined, I won't go, oh, wait a minute, there's no such thing as Juvenile Diabetes Research Association. I support the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So instead, I'm going to feel a little bit embarrassed, and I'm going to write a check, put it in the mail, and I just got scammed. So see how falling victim to senior scams is nothing to do with intelligence or sophistication or street smarts, and everything to do with our cognitive abilities. So that's why judgment, reasoning, problem solving, decision making should be strengthened in any cognitive training class. We are very fortunate in the Metro Detroit area to have mind aerobics cognitive training classes available to us. A Jewish Family Service has licensed their curriculum created by the New England Cognitive Center. And they have developed a phenomenal cognitive training program that gives brains a total workout. Best of all, no workout clothes are required. And they have 5 different levels of curriculum. So regardless of the level of cognitive functioning someone has, there is something they can be doing to actively fight back, to increase their mental stimulation, to try and combat some of those changes. 3 of those levels are available virtually. We've worked very closely with the New England Cognitive Center during the recent pandemic because they always had been taught face-to-face in the past. But this is an evidence-informed program based on research. So what that means is people who are interested in taking the cognitive training classes reach out to us, and we do some cognitive assessing for them using a battery of tools. Number 1, to be sure that we find the right level class for them. If people are in a class that's too easy, they'll have a great time. Classes are fun, but they're not going to get the cognitive benefit that they deserve. If people are in a class that's too hard for them, it can be too challenging. So it's almost like the Goldilocks phenomenon. You need the class that's just right for you. So that's part of the purpose of the pre-assessing. But then people who are interested in adding to the body of research can also be post-tested at the end of class. Then their information is blinded, so no names, dates, birthdays, and sent where it is analyzed. And people can look to see how did people do in the classes, and people can get a report that's customized for them. Typically, the results from the New England Cognitive Center's cognitive training classes is that people who have normal cognition, now remember, normal is a range, so people that might describe themselves as mildly forgetful, but on true cognitive assessment tools, they would score in the normal range. They tend to improve in 2 to 3 of those 6 areas we just talked about. We all will improve in different ones. We improve where we're weak. So for me, my language skills are a strength. So when I took the classes, I didn't improve in language, but my visual spatial skills are my weaker areas. We all have more developed areas and weaker areas. So that's where I showed improvement. So most people with normal cognition will improve in 2 to 3 areas. And studies have shown that they maintain those improvements even a year later without doing any follow-up. That's like going to the gym twice a week for 3 months, not going back and not losing any muscle tone. Sign me up for that plan. Now, people that already have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's and they've had some significant decline, it's good news and bad news when we look at the results. The good news is they tend to improve in more than just 2 or 3 areas because they have declined in more areas. So they have more room to improve, to be brought up. But people who have significant impairment, they don't hold those improvements without doing some follow-up. We always send out suggested activities for how to incorporate training these domains in everyday life following classes. It seems that if people have normal cognition, it's great if they do it, but it's not critical. It does seem to be critical to follow up in some way for people with cognitive impairments. It's important to understand that when the New England Cognitive Center developed these programs, programs, their goal was not to help anyone improve their cognition. We know that cognition declines. It declines because of our age, or it declines because if we happen to have a gene to develop a dementia. And the goal was to slow that decline. Instead of being steep like a ski slope, if we could make it so much more gradual, then that really helps people have an improved quality of life. But when their data came in and was analyzed, they found that many people were improving. And this has been found time and time again. So this was really novel to understand that. One of the improvements that as a social worker I get most excited about is that part of the battery of assessments that we do pre and post cognitive training includes geriatric depression scale. And most people have significant improvement in that area. And I think for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's increased socialization. Classes are fun. They're on a group setting. Even if it's on the Zoom screen, it's the same 12 people week after week. But also, I think people feel badly about themselves when they recognize they're having some cognitive change. And when they see that we're all in the same boat, then they seem to feel better about themselves. So that's been a wonderful, wonderful result. So that's largely the information that I wanted to share today. There's contact information. I know that this will be up through Gracefully Graying, but if anybody wanted to reach out to us for more information, here's a phone number and an email address that can be used. And with that, I'm going to stop the share and turn it over to you, Henry.
Lynn, we've got less than 2 minutes left. So before we wrap this excellent show on putting your best brain forward, are there some takeaways that you would like to provide for our viewers before we sign off?
Absolutely, I would. First and foremost, it's okay if you notice some slight changes, that you need to look at a calendar rather than keeping things in your mind. If you've noticed you're a little more distractible and it's more challenging to focus your attention, it's okay. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel embarrassed. It can happen to all of us, and it will if we're lucky to live a long life. These normal changes, though, shouldn't be so significant that they impact our ability to function. And if we can't function socially or at work or in a volunteer capacity or however we function, it's a great time to reach out to our physicians. But once we're clear that these are normal, expected, age-related changes, just because they're normal, it doesn't mean there's nothing to do about it. Fight back. Engage in as much mental stimulation as you can. If a little part of you always wanted to learn a language, try it now. It doesn't matter how far you get. It's the process of trying. If you're used to playing an instrument, pick it up again, relearn it. Don't turn down offers to get together, whether it's virtual or in person, to increase your socialization. Manage your stress. If there's a cognitive training program that is research-based available to you in your local community or available virtually, seek it out, find more information, exercise your brain whenever possible. Those would be my best suggestions.
Lynn, this is wonderful. I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. And I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying. Please watch this complete series on putting your best brain forward. Thank you.